Welcome to the Football Film Room Show. I'm Nick Kehoe, and we've got another great episode for you today. We're going to talk about the top quarterback prospects in the draft. A couple weeks ago, nobody was talking about anyone other than Fernando Mendoza. Seemed like a foregone conclusion that he'd be going number one overall to the Raiders. And based on reports that he is already learning the Raiders' playbook, it seems like that's still a foregone conclusion. But in recent weeks, Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson has entered the discussion. And that's thanks in large part to Dan Orlovsky throwing a giant turd in the punch bowl and mixing things up, I guess you could say, saying that he thinks Ty Simpson is actually the better prospect. So I'll get into all that. I'll break down both players' games, tell you their strengths and weaknesses, compare the two, tell you why I don't entirely disagree with Orlovsky's analysis. But before I do that, I want to reiterate a point I made on the podcast a few weeks ago about the quarterback position in general. When you look at the all-time great quarterbacks, there are very few in the history of the NFL who you can say they'd still be considered all-time greats no matter what situation they were in, no matter what team they were drafted by or traded to or signed with. I think you could even make the argument that there are no quarterbacks in the history of the game that would have still had their level of success had they been in any other situation. And that's because football is the quintessential team sport. It depends who you have blocking for you. It depends who you're throwing to, what running game you have to support you. And on top of that, it depends who your head coach is, what his philosophy is. It depends who your offensive coordinator is, who's calling the plays. Depends who your quarterback coach is. Depends how you're developed. And if you want a little proof of that, just think about who the two best quarterbacks are in the history of the game, at least according to the general NFL world consensus. Tom Brady and Joe Montana. Now, I'm not going to get into a discussion with you today about if they are actually the best. We'll save that for another time, but I think that's just the general consensus. But the interesting thing is that both of those quarterbacks would not be considered the GOATs if not for the exact situations they were in. Now, again, I want to emphasize, I'm not trying to take away from either quarterback. I'm not trying to say that each individual player doesn't have a significant amount of say in how well they play, how well they perform based on their preparation, physical training, their mental makeup, etc. But I think it's hard to deny that Joe Montana would be the Joe Montana we all know and love if he hadn't been drafted by Bill Walsh. And I think the same can be true of Tom Brady with the Patriots. Let's go back to 1979. That was the year that Montana was drafted. He was not highly regarded around the NFL at that time. He ended up getting drafted 82nd overall, end of the third round. But there were questions about his size. He was 6'2", but just 185 pounds. Receiver Dwight Clark, when he first met him, he thought he was the kicker or the punter. So there were questions about could he withstand the beating that quarterbacks in the NFL took at that time. He didn't have a powerful arm, and in that era, the NFL passing game was kind of a complement to the run. You were attacking downfield. No one was dinking and dunking and getting 4 yards at a time. And then, of course, Bill Walsh came along. 1979 was his first year as the 49ers head coach. We all know now that he implemented that West Coast offense where the passing game was based on timing and rhythm, and you mixed in short throws with your intermediate and downfield passes. And because he was the only one running his offense that way, he saw something in Montana. He liked how quick and agile his feet were. I believe he said Montana looked a bit like a ballet dancer. That's how smooth and rhythmic he could be with his feet. And that fit perfectly for his passing game. So he was able to push aside the fact that Montana didn't have an especially strong arm, or was inconsistent in college, or was slight in his build. And I think it's fair to say that if Montana had been drafted anywhere else, he may not have been playing in a system that was perfectly suited for those abilities. On top of that, Walsh didn't just throw Montana into the fire. Montana barely played his first season. He only had one start. But here's the thing. Walsh found ways to insert him into the game at times. But he wouldn't do it randomly. He was very deliberate with the way he developed Montana. He would wait until the offense crossed midfield so that he could put Montana in position to succeed. And again, he did it sparingly. Montana threw just 23 passes that season. 49ers went 2-14. The next year they came back, and Walsh started to work Montana into the offense a little bit more. Same sort of thing. He would put Montana in when it was advantageous to do so, when he could be put in a position to succeed, either in the opponent's territory or in the red zone. And eventually, by season's end, Montana became the starter. I think he started 7 games that year in total. But there were 11 overall games where he threw a pass. So again, Walsh was very intentional with the way he developed Montana. And then 1981 comes along. That's the first year he's the full-time starter. 49ers go 13-3, go on to win the Super Bowl, and the rest is history. But I think it's safe to say that wouldn't have happened anywhere else. Fast forward to 2000 and the New England Patriots. Tom Brady was drafted 199th overall, as you all know. But he was drafted there for a reason. He was not the Tom Brady that we all know and love now. He was not highly regarded. Obviously, being drafted in the 6th round tells you that. And he ended up going to the Patriots, got to play under Bill Belichick, and there were a couple of very unique circumstances that allowed him to develop into the quarterback that he became. The first was Drew Bledsoe's injury, right? If that doesn't happen, who knows if we ever know Tom Brady's name? Who knows if Drew Bledsoe, who was the highest paid quarterback in the game at that time, would have just been benched for not playing well. He was a quarterback in his prime as well. So it's not like he was over the hill and you had this young up-and-coming quarterback in Brady. It would have made sense to just replace Bledsoe with Brady. I'm not sure that happens. On top of that, the other situation Brady had, the other very unique circumstance to him being in New England was that he got to play for Bill Belichick. To this day, Tom Brady says that his main superpower as an NFL quarterback was being able to know what the defense was doing before they were doing it. And he often credits Bill Belichick with that because he said he certainly wasn't that way when he entered the league. Right? He was a slow quarterback in everything he did, not just the way he ran, but his footwork in the pocket, the way he threw the ball, the way he processed. He was told during his rookie season, everything you do, you need to be doing it faster. So I'll reiterate. Tom Brady was drafted 199th overall, not because the league is a bunch of idiots and everyone just passed on the best quarterback of all time. It's because that was the caliber of player he was at that time. Wasn't especially physically gifted, was a traditional pocket passer, but even as a pocket passer, he wasn't elite right away. There was a lot of development needed with him. But the combination of him going and playing for Belichick and learning from Belichick, as well as Bledsoe getting hurt, those two things combined to give him the opportunity, and he was able to play on a team that had a really good defense, so he didn't need to carry the day. I've told you these stats before several times, but I'll reiterate it one more time. In Brady's final 8 games that season, including the playoffs, he threw 3 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. The Patriots went 8-0 in those games. So he ended up in a perfect situation. And I challenge any of you out there, go through the exercise. I've done this before. Go through the exercise of seeing what Brady's career may have looked like had he been drafted by any other team in the NFL. Now, again, you have to assume he would have been drafted somewhere around the 199th overall pick like he was, because that's how he was regarded around the NFL. What situation is he coming into as a 6th-round draft pick where he is getting an opportunity to play? Because every scenario I went through led to one of 2 outcomes. One, Brady never would have seen the field because there was already a starter there. Maybe he works his way in as a backup, but after his rookie contract is up after 3 years, he's probably had very little experience. No one is trading for him or looking to sign him to be their starter if he hasn't played much in 3 years and wasn't highly regarded coming out of the draft. So that's one outcome. The other outcome is that he does force his way on the field, but that would have been for a bad team. And then had Tom Brady gotten that opportunity to play, well, he wouldn't have had the coaching from Belichick. Certainly wouldn't have had Belichick's defense on the other side of the ball to allow him to ease into games and manage games and not have to put up 30 points to win. And in all honesty, he probably ends up in a situation where he gets to start, half the season? Probably does not have great support around him. Probably ends up just getting that one shot. I know this is all hypothetical, but I had trouble finding any situation. If Tom Brady went to any of the other 30 teams in the NFL at the time, I had trouble finding a situation where in those first 3 or 4 years, he's getting on the field and it's a good situation. And then after that rookie contract is done, no one's signing him to be the starter. Maybe he stays with whatever team he was drafted as a backup. Maybe he moves on somewhere else to become a backup. And I'm not saying he couldn't eventually force his way in the field and develop, but wouldn't have developed in the timeline that he did and to the extent that he did. I think it's safe to say that. And again, this is not a knock on Tom Brady. And the reason I bring all this up is because when we talk about the quarterback position, there is so much outside of the quarterback's control that will determine how good of a player they'll be, how good of a career they'll have. And this brings us to Fernando Mendoza versus Ty Simpson. Now, in my opinion, I think Fernando Mendoza is the better prospect. If I'm the Raiders, I'm drafting him. But Simpson has a lot of good traits. And if you came to me 5 years from now and you showed me both of their careers and what they had done to that point, and you showed me Simpson being the better player or having had a better career than Mendoza, I wouldn't be shocked. Because both players will need good situations to succeed, just like really any quarterback in the history of the NFL. I think we've seen a lot of that in recent years, certainly with Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, guys like Daniel Jones even. And, of course, you've got it in those situations I mentioned earlier with Joe Montana and Tom Brady. But let's break down Mendoza first. There's not a lot to dislike about him as a quarterback. He's 6'5", which is important. That's a big deal. It's important to be tall if you're a quarterback. Doesn't mean you have to be tall to be a great quarterback, but it does help to be 6'5". He's got a compact throwing motion, quick release. He's got a strong enough arm to make any throw. But the thing I like most about him is that he's a quick processor, a quick decision maker. You know, a lot of Indiana's offense was RPO, and he'll certainly do some of that in the NFL. But the more important thing coming out of that RPO passing game is that you do need to be able to make quick snap decisions and make throws into tight spaces close to the line of scrimmage. That's a skill. That's an important thing to be able to have, and Mendoza can do all that. I think very similar to Tom Brady in that regard in terms of being able to navigate that quick passing game and see everything. That height certainly helps with that, but his ability to process is certainly a plus for him. But I don't want to make it seem like that quick processing is just on short throws. You know, to be fair, he did really live in that world 10 yards and in from the line of scrimmage, but he made plenty of throws at the intermediate level that required quick processing, good timing, anticipation. He was more than capable of making those throws, did so consistently, was able to attack downfield effectively. Like he wasn't just a dink and dunk quarterback. I don't want to create that perception. Because like I said, he could attack downfield. He was especially good at one-on-ones. If he saw a one-on-one on the outside, he would target it. And then he would make the right throw to beat the coverage. Whether he had to put it over the top with some touch, whether he had to make a firm throw to the back shoulder, he threw these balls with great timing, anticipation, almost threw it before the cornerback could even respond or react to it. But he was precise on those throws. He was pristine on those throws. And that's so important because the best quarterbacks in the game, when they aren't sure necessarily what the coverage is going to be, but they see that they have a one-on-one and they have the ability to consistently hit those one-on-ones, it calms everything down. Defenses, you can do whatever you want in the middle with your disguise, your blitzes, whatever. If I've got a one-on-one on the outside, I'm just going to take it. And I'm going to pick up 10 yards, 15 yards, 20 yards. And Mendoza did that repeatedly, relentlessly. Very similar to what you see from someone like Aaron Rodgers, for instance. You got a one-on-one, you take it. Sometimes the game of playing quarterback is just finding the best one-on-one and making the right throw to beat the coverage. There's always a throw to make on a one-on-one. But I think that also speaks to his ball placement. And again, I differentiate accuracy from ball placement. Accuracy is certainly a part of ball placement. You know, accuracy is just the actual act of throwing the ball. Are you putting it exactly where you're targeting? But ball placement is more, all right, are you making the right throw to beat the coverage? Are you aware of the defenders in the area? Are you recognizing the body leverage of the defender who's on your receiver and then making a throw accordingly? And I think Mendoza is great at that. He makes every different type of throw. He'll put the ball in the right spot. If you're on the goal line, he'll put it low. If you're in the back of the end zone, high back five, that's a rule for a quarterback. He'll put it above the defense. I mean, he'll make the right play. He's very, very good at the nuances of the position. And that's something you want in a quarterback, especially if you're taking him in the first round, especially if you're taking him first overall. On top of that, he's tough mentally and physically. You saw the way he took a beating in the national championship game against Miami and just kept getting back up, and then, of course, had that great run at the end, basically the game-sealing touchdown run. But there were plays throughout the season where Indiana was trailing, fourth quarter, and he would make a tight window throw. Had a game against Iowa where he had a really bad interception in the fourth quarter, came back on the very next drive, made a big-time throw. Right, so he's mentally tough, he's physically tough. Those are the quote-unquote intangibles or some of the intangibles that you want to see in your quarterback, and Mendoza certainly has those. And then you look at his ability to run. He's not going to run past that many people in the NFL. No one's going to confuse him for Lamar Jackson, but he can make some plays. He's 6'5", sort of a long strider. His running ability can be a little bit deceptive, his speed can be a little bit deceptive at times. But he's not going to live that way. He's not going to live off of making plays with his legs. He will be able to scramble for first downs. You can probably do the occasional read option here or there with him. Probably don't want to be doing a ton of that in the NFL. But overall, he's got enough athleticism to be able to make plays outside of structure, get out on the perimeter, make throws on the run, scramble for a few first downs with his legs. But overall, I have very few complaints about Mendoza's game. I think his arm could be a little bit stronger, and he'll gain a little bit of arm strength when he gets to the NFL, as all quarterbacks do. Won't be drastic, but there are some throws where when he's attacking downfield, the ball does die at times. There were a few plays where if he didn't have his feet under him, he didn't have enough just pure arm strength to get the ball there in time. It hung a little bit. But none of that's completely debilitating. None of that, whatever he's lacking in arm strength, it's not that significant. It's not something that's going to really impact his ability to play the position or make really any type of throw at the NFL level. I think the biggest question I have about Mendoza is it's not about anything that I've really seen in his game. It's just a question because I didn't necessarily see him do it a ton, and that is attacking downfield late in the play, right? Didn't see many throws at the intermediate level where he had gone through his first 2 or even 3 reads and then come to the backside and hit a dig late. Didn't see many throws like that. Didn't see a ton of plays where he worked all the way through his progressions. There were a few, so I think he has the ability. I just don't know how consistent he could be at that. And the other part of that is I don't know if that's really a hole to his game at this point. I need to see more once he gets to the NFL. But I can't say it's necessarily a hole. It could be because the offense was designed around getting the ball out quickly, a lot of RPOs. Did they design the offense specifically for Mendoza, or was that the offense and Mendoza did a good job of executing it? Can't really say. But I think a big part of his game is he's very quick at processing. He doesn't get hung up on reads, and those are good things. He gets the ball out of his hands, and as a result of that, you saw him make a lot of decisions early in the play, right? Very decisive as a quarterback. Get the ball out, keep the offense on schedule. So that's just something I want to see more of in the NFL to get a better picture on him is how can he play later in the down from the pocket? I think that's one thing that's just, it's a bit of a mystery, right? But it's not enough to concern me. It's not enough to make me say, oh, Raiders, you should completely reconsider drafting Mendoza. And I think he'll be a good fit for Kubiak's offense. Clint Kubiak's offense, the big question is they do a lot of under center stuff, and pretty much everything Mendoza did was from shotgun. So that'll be a bit of an adjustment for him, but more importantly, Kubiak's offense was a timing and rhythm offense, and Mendoza is a timing and rhythm player. So it will be a good fit, I believe. Now, Kubiak didn't do a ton of RPO with the Seahawks last year, so maybe he'll incorporate a little bit more of that to get Mendoza comfortable. But again, I don't think the RPO game that Mendoza lived in, I don't think that's a negative necessarily. I don't think it's something that he has to rely on to be good as a quarterback. I think, if anything, it trained him to just make quick snap decisions, and he was effective at doing that, and that's going to serve him well at the NFL level. It's going to serve him well in Kubiak's system, regardless of if they run RPOs or not. And that brings us to Ty Simpson, Alabama quarterback, obviously. You know, the more I watched him on film, the more I liked him. He's got a strong arm. He's athletic. He's not Josh Allen by any means, but he's got a stronger arm than Mendoza. There were some throws that you say, oh, wow, that jumped out of his hand. He can make throws flat-footed because he does have a strong arm. So, like, he can make any throw that you need him to in the NFL. Where he really excels is in the middle of the field. Now, he was running an NFL-style offense at Alabama, and there were a ton of throws where he had to navigate the intermediate middle, where he had to hit digs late in the play. And not only could he do that, he seemed comfortable doing that. He seemed like that was his preference. Right? It almost seemed like there would be plays where he would look to the left and there would be a 2 or 3 receiver combination, and he'd come off it early because he wanted to hit that dig over the middle. But there were also times where, hey, he read it out correctly. There was nobody open to one side, came back to the backside, his 4th receiver, and then he drilled a dig into a window between 2 defenders, into a tiny window between 2 defenders. So he had a really good feel, really good spatial awareness and vision for throws over the middle. And that's something, that's important because that is not something that if you don't have, you necessarily develop once you get to the NFL. Vision and the ability to navigate the places of the field that have the defenders lurking from underneath, from over the top, from the backside. That's why being able to work the middle is so important. But he's clearly comfortable there. He can make any of those throws where He's either putting it between linebackers or maybe over a linebacker, but doing so with that, I call it firm touch, where you can't let the ball sail so it goes into the safety's hands who's sitting behind the route, but you can't just zip it in there and throw it through linebackers. So you have to put it over linebackers, but not too much over. I think he was great at those throws. And again, working the middle of the field, that's something that if you can't do that as a quarterback, it limits you as an offense. If you have to just live on the outside or live in the short game and on the outside and you can't attack the intermediate middle, eventually over the course of a 17-game NFL season and against better defenses as you start to play them later in the season in the playoffs, you're going to be limited. This is very relevant to one of the stories that came out this week about Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. I won't go into detail on that. I'm sure you've read that, or if you want to, you can go look it up. But as I've said many times, Hurts is not comfortable navigating the middle of the field. And that's led to some of their shortcomings in the passing game late in the season in 2 of the last 3 years. So it's a good thing for Simpson that he can do that. He can navigate that. That gives offensive coordinators a lot to work with. And one more thing I'll add about Simpson is that, his pocket presence, I think he needs some work. And I'll get to that in a second. But one of the things he is pretty good at is throwing with bodies around him. Right? If he has a receiver downfield and he wants to deliver the throw, he sees his receiver is open, he knows he needs to get the ball out, he is not bothered by pressure around him, by pressure closing in on him, by the pocket collapsing around him. He can throw out of a phone booth or out of a hole, so to speak. So that's another great plus for him. One of the issues, though, is that his pocket presence, aside from I have a receiver, I know I'm going to throw it to him, I just need to be able to stay in here and take a hit, throw with bodies around me. He can do that. But if he has to move in the pocket, that's when things start to break down. You really didn't see him navigate pressure within the pocket by moving, sliding, keeping his feet while also keeping a downfield focus. If he ever did have to move in the pocket, his feet would either completely break down or he would go into running playmaker mode and try to bolt the pocket. So he would leave the pocket too early at times. Sometimes he was a little overreactive to a jersey flashing if he hadn't yet made his decision on where he wanted to go with the ball. And that led to him leaving some plays on the field. It actually reminded me a lot of Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones we all think of as a mobile quarterback, but he's not great at navigating pressure within the pocket. He's very similar in terms of he'll stay in and take a hit if he has a receiver, but if he needs to move, he bolts or his feet break down. He doesn't slide, reset, keep that downfield focus from within the pocket, and that's what you need to be able to do to succeed and be consistent at the NFL level if you're a pocket passer. So that's one thing to keep an eye on with Simpson. There were a few examples also of forced throws, bad decisions. I know he didn't throw a lot of interceptions this year, but there were enough plays where you said, why are you throwing that? There were 2 guys there. You weren't under pressure. Why are you even making that pass? Why are you attempting that? So that was one concern. I think another concern I had was on some of his shorter passes. Despite being accurate at the intermediate and deep levels, he missed a lot of easy throws. He missed a lot of short throws, a lot of layups, or just didn't put the ball in the right spot. And that's one of those things that does make you say, okay, maybe he's not as accurate of a passer as he needs to be. Because when you're throwing those short passes, the receiver doesn't have the ability to adjust and make you right as a quarterback. So pretty much inside of 10 yards, if you're missing a throw, unless it's a miscommunication, that's on you as the quarterback. And those short throws are good litmus tests for, are you accurate as a thrower? Because you either have to put the ball on your receiver, and if you're off by just a little bit, you're going to turn him around. He's not going to have time to adjust. He's not going to get his hands up. Not going to turn his body around where he needs to. Right? You need to be able to put the ball exactly where you want with pinpoint accuracy to be a good, quick game, short passing game quarterback. And I think that's where he showed some inconsistencies. Now, getting into the comparison between Simpson and Mendoza, I want to get back to Montana and Brady. There's a reason I brought them up. Not because I think Mendoza and Simpson are going to be Joe Montana and Tom Brady, but because your ability to have success as a quarterback is largely dependent on the situation around you. And as I said earlier, I would not be surprised with any outcome between these 2 quarterbacks. If 5 years from now you told me that Mendoza is on his way to the Hall of Fame and Simpson is kind of middling, kind of not really finding his way, the team that drafted him is about to move on from him, I wouldn't be surprised. I also wouldn't be surprised if 5 years from now you told me that Mendoza he was not a sure thing. He did not end up being one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Maybe he ended up being a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who the jury's still out on him. I would also not be surprised if you told me that Simpson was tearing it up wherever he went, because he has the ability to develop into a quarterback like that. But getting into the nuts and bolts and the differences between the two, the first thing is size. Mendoza is 6'5", Simpson is 6'1", 4 inches. That makes a huge difference as a quarterback. It doesn't mean you have to be 6'5" to be a good quarterback, but to play from the pocket, like both these quarterbacks do, it certainly helps to have size. It certainly helps to be able to see over the line. And I also wonder if Simpson's inability to be quite as consistent throwing the ball in the short passing game isn't somehow tied to his height, isn't somehow tied to him maybe not seeing over the line out of his peripheral vision, and so not being confident of where defenders are. I might be making too much of that. Maybe it's just a mechanical thing that he'll be able to fix with one NFL training camp. But that could be an issue. Either way, for Mendoza at 6'5", to play the way he does, it helps to have that height, right? Because he can see everything. He can see over the line. There's really, he can still see downfield if defenders are in his face, or a little bit better than Simpson would be able to at 6'1". So it absolutely can make a difference. It absolutely can make a difference. You also look at Mendoza, and he has more experience playing, which is always important at the quarterback position. He's had over 30 starts in college. Simpson, on the other hand, was only a starter this past year, started 15 games. And so we've seen some quarterbacks in the past who didn't have a ton of experience in college but had good traits struggle when they get to the NFL because they don't have as large of a memory bank to fall back on. They don't have as many situations they've been confronted with that they can look to guide them through whatever situation they're in currently. And I mean that in terms of looking at coverages, recognizing blitzes, and reacting to them accordingly. But then you look at Simpson, you say he's got a stronger arm than Mendoza, and even though arm strength isn't everything, if you can make more throws based on your physical abilities, that opens things up on offense, or it can open things up on offense. I don't want to say it's such a huge difference. Like I said, Mendoza has a strong enough arm, but I definitely give the edge to Simpson in that area. On top of that, he had a lot more experience making NFL-type throws. Like I said, digs, in cuts, late in the play. You saw him hit those cover two hole throws. So that's going to serve him well at the NFL level. And again, not that Mendoza can't necessarily do that. We just haven't seen him do as much of that, so we don't know. But the way I'd characterize the difference between these two, just from a stylistic standpoint, is Mendoza to me is a early in the down quarterback. He's going to catch the ball from the center, quickly process, get the ball out where it needs to go, keep the offense moving forward. Simpson, on the other hand, he doesn't quite play with that same amount of timing, but he is much better late in the play from the pocket. He's comfortable hanging in and attacking at the intermediate or even deep levels late in the play if he has to. He's not a quarterback who, to push the ball downfield, he has to do it with absolutely perfect timing. Otherwise, the window's going to close because he doesn't have enough arm strength. No. He can sit in the pocket and hit those digs over the middle late in the play. He can do that. He can make flat-footed throws downfield and beat the defense over the top. That's really the biggest difference I see between the two stylistically. At the end of the day, though, bottom line is that I think Mendoza has a much higher floor, but Simpson has a bit higher of a ceiling. But I don't have any concerns with the Raiders taking Mendoza. I don't think they need to second-guess taking Mendoza. I think he's the number one pick. You saw the level of consistency in his game. You see the way he plays the game with nuance. There's no reason to go anywhere else other than Mendoza. He's the right pick for that team. They've been searching for a quarterback for a while. To me, he's the guy, and it really shouldn't even take much debate inside that building. But I don't think all the recent talk about Simpson is just trying to get clicks on ESPN or anything along those lines. I think Simpson is a legitimate prospect. And look, if you're a team like the Jets in need of a quarterback, you're a team like the Browns, I don't know why you wouldn't take Simpson. There's a lot of time between now and next year's draft. I know everyone's planning on gearing up for the 2027 NFL draft. There's supposed to be more blue-chip quarterback prospects in that draft. But you never know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're going to be in position to get one of those quarterbacks. So if you like Simpson, I don't see any reason not to take him because we've got this other draft class coming out in 2027. You don't know where you're going to be next year. You don't know what's going to happen to those quarterbacks next year. Injuries, level of play falling off, decisions to stay in school. You just don't know. So if I were the Jets and I looked at Simpson, I liked him, I would say, yeah, let's draft him. We've got Geno Smith. He can be the veteran who plays ahead of him. You let Simpson learn behind him. You ease him in. You put him in the right situations, similar to what Bill Walsh did with Joe Montana, and you go from there. If you're a team like the Steelers, regardless of what happens with Aaron Rodgers this year, there's no reason not to take him if he's still there and you're on the clock. I think he's got the tools that you're looking for if you want to develop a young quarterback for the future. Now, am I making a prediction that he's going to be a Hall of Famer? No, absolutely not. I think there's enough mystery to his game that makes me hesitate there. That's it for today's show. Thank you all for listening. I will have film breakdowns up on footballfilmroom.com for both Mendoza and for Simpson. Hopefully going to be able to talk with you about Jeremiah Love next week. I'm sure there's going to be some other NFL news happening between now and the next time I talk to you. But I think that's everything I've got for you today, and I'll see you next time.